Welcome, WGA members, to Controversy at Noon. I can promise you this is going to be the most controversial Controversy at Noon that you'll hear this year. I'm kidding. I am with my lovely panelists today, Sandra Wong, Nisha Patel, and Lauren Seal. You could have read their bios through that slideshow at the beginning, as well as our land acknowledgement. And I just want to make mention that I am in Treaty 7 and Métis Region 3, just on the edge of Tsuut'ina land. So I continue to learn from the people that are my neighbors. And we're all neighbors here today. We're having a conversation about rejection. You can't really be a writer without that word becoming a part of your vocabulary. And I'm going to start off just by asking the question that comes directly out of the topic, which is rejection, frame or reframe. And at first, when I looked at this topic, I thought, what do they actually mean by frame? Literally framing the rejection on the wall as some sort of rite of passage, some sort of validation that you are a writer because you've received a rejection, or maybe it's a positive rejection that you can learn from and grow from, or reframe. So I'm going to ask that of my panelists first, starting with Sandra. Rejection. Do you frame or reframe?
I absolutely 100% do not frame. I think I wonder if that became really popular. Was that in Stephen King's memoir on writing? Is that something that he did? I know for sure he saved his rejection letters because, of course, back in the day. Some of you may not be familiar depending on the age you are, but back in the day, everything was snail mail, right? So you literally had to post those letters. Nowadays, maybe they have a Pinterest board for their rejection letters. I don't know. I do not frame them. I don't even know about reframing. They're just a normal part. If you're going to get into publishing, whatever genre you are, whatever medium or media, it's just a normal part of publishing. So I don't really feel like I need to reframe either, but I'll get more into that. That's just my short answer.
Nisha, what about you? Frame or reframe?
I just think it's so funny. This is the second time this year I've been asked to talk about rejection. And I was like, is there something about being rejected that has been like exuding out of me? But I think a really big movement started a couple years ago in the US and kind of spread, and it was called the Publishing Paid Me hashtag. And so people were feeling what they were getting paid. And I think we were finding out that sorry, my window's open, so you're going to hear all the birds. I think you were finding out that some people were getting paid a lot more than we thought was deserving, which is also kind of messed up. But then most people were getting paid a lot less, Jordan Abel, who is a mentor of mine, tells us that his first advance was like zero, right? In Canada, especially, these numbers are so much lower for the most part. Sales numbers are lower, and the bar for success is just it really shifts, right? Sometimes people don't support you in a monetary way, and that's fine. And so, for me, success and failure aren't about, I think, framing. I'm not trying to move goalposts to show and display and perform success anymore. I think mostly, I see rejection as just how much can I generate from the learning process that comes with it. And I'll be really honest, sometimes I don't feel that I've learned from a rejection. Sometimes it just hurts, right? And that's okay too. To just be you know what? That wasn't the right fit, and maybe that's all I learned from it.
Excellent. And Lauren, frame or reframe?
Delete immediately is no. I'll read. I don't frame it. I don't celebrate it. When I first started being okay, I'm gonna actually start getting into writing. I'm gonna get off my butt and do it and start sending stuff out. I sent a piece that I knew wasn't ready to a very, I was reaching with the place I was sending it to, just because I was this deadline's coming up soon, and I just need to be rejected at least once to know how much it hurts and what I should be expecting. So I did that, but I don't really reframe it either now. I kind of just accept it. I'm just like, this is what it is. Some person made a subjective, formed in a subjective opinion about this thing that I sent them. Something about it rubbed them the wrong way. Now I just have to move on. Maybe if they gave me good feedback, incorporate it. Just, yeah, no, I think it's more just like a withering acceptance.
So it's just a normal part of the process. But how long did it take you to get to that point where you could normalize receiving rejections and perhaps have that sort of distance that the work was being judged, not you, the person? Did it take any of you some considerable time to get to that point where you could be a little bit more neutral, even if it still hurt, or even if, you know, you had your expectations for a particular piece to be accepted somewhere? What was that like, that sort of spectrum of learning to accept rejection, or going from like being devastated to realizing, okay, this is just part of it, to, you know, or has it changed? Have you had a sort of similar experience with rejection all along? Or has your time in the writing industry changed your response to rejection? Start with Nisha on that one.
You know, because I started writing both after university, I didn't take writing courses in my younger years in university for it. And I also started in poetry slam, which is, you know, competitive spoken word. Judgment becomes such a core part of your practice. You know, every single week you often are giving a poem. If you're slamming, immediately the audience is giving you a score, and you don't even know the audience sometimes, right? Or if you know them and they give you a low score, you're like, oh, I didn't expect that, right? And so the refinement process and the editing process was like a super public one. You know, the whole room could see when a poem had failed, or a whole room could see when it had an effect on people, right? And that doesn't happen in a lot of other spaces, right? Like it's so unique. And I think that like really hardened me to when these other things would come. And when I tried to kind of transition to a more formal publishing space, even formal education, now that I'm doing a program for the first time, it was both really hard, and also a little bit easier for me. You know, like I was so used to this very public, literally in your face rejection. I took it a little bit easier, but the barriers were different, right? Now it was like, you know, you waited months for a rejection, right? Or you submitted here and here and here, and it was very normal to not get a response back. I mentioned it before, but I hate submitting to journals. I hate submitting to magazines. And as far as my energy goes, like I just don't do it most of the time anymore, right? Like there's such a concentrated area where I can contribute and feel that I'm okay with a rejection. And now the rejections are, sometimes they're bigger and sometimes they're smaller. There was like a $300 grant a summer ago that I was not even shortlisted for. I was like, it was $300. It was local, you know. And then later it was like, I put together an application. It took 22 hours for a multi-layer grant. It was international. It was going from all these other places. Big rejection. And then I saw that they called for more applications because they didn't get enough quality ones. And I was like, oh, that's like I'm just gonna understand that as rejection. So there's all sorts of different kinds, and like all of them hurt, but I can choose which ones I want to put my energy to. Now I'm very lucky that I've built up a resilience to that, and also that I know when I can take it.
Excellent. Lauren or Sandra, either of you, what, you know, have your experiences been similar to Nisha's? I mean, I don't know if either of you have that experience of spoken word or slam poetry. I'm telling you, we're going to sign up after hearing that, because yeah, there would be nothing like the audience response to know whether you nailed it or whether your poem didn't land. So I can see why that would completely change, or even make it easier initially for some of those more traditional literary rejections in a different setting and space. And then sometimes as a new writer, you get lucky right away and you get a piece accepted. So then there's that expectation that future pieces are going to get accepted. And that's where I've noticed a lot of people, you know, who've come to me with that sort of rejection woe, where they got lucky early. You know, they might have had a couple things published right away from their early submissions, and then they'll go a very long time without, and then it feels like you've done something wrong or that you're going in reverse. So sometimes it's the timing of those rejections. Any comments there from you, Sandra or Lauren?
Actually, I want to comment on you bringing up luck, because I think that is a very large part of traditional publishing, is being lucky. But that does not negate the hard work any of us put into our careers or our work either. So it coexists at the same time as we're working our little butts off. So I started querying agents in 2011, which is 13. What year is it? It's 13 years ago. And at that point, I was very invested in the replies, and I got a number of rejections. And I kept wondering, I kept having to work very hard to separate myself and my worth as a person, and even as a writer, from those rejections. So I definitely had to work at it. When I finally got my first book contract, I actually did it without an agent. So it was just a straight to the publisher, and they had an author group. And I was so scared that I just wasn't good enough, and I would be rejected even by this new author group, who were expressly, this community had been created to support authors just like me. But I was so freaked out about it, I couldn't even join. I didn't even join that community because I thought, I don't think I'm going to measure up. I'm going to make all these mistakes. People are just going to laugh at me and go, boy, this is a rube. Like, she doesn't know anything. Oh my God. Like, I made up all this stuff, and that was part of the fear of rejection. Fast forward, it's been 13 years, and now it's like, it's fine. It's totally fine, because I am not my work. Part of me goes into my work, right? Part of me goes into the work. And I think we're all like that. That's why we do this. Part of our heart, our soul, our spirit goes into our work, but that's not me. It's not the whole of me. And I have worth as a person on my own, whether I write another thing or publish another thing ever again. So that's a thing that I remember, and I'm much more solidly grounded in. So that is okay, but that's not to say that when I get a rejection, it doesn't hurt. I definitely give myself time to feel my feelings, because I have feelings for sure. I have a great editor at HarperCollins Canada. She's wonderful. She's so good at what she does. She sent me an 11-page edit letter, and there was half a sentence about how good I was. Everything else was everything wrong with that manuscript. So you bet I felt my feelings about that for a while, and then let that settle. And just, for me, how I interface with my editors is I remember that they are working on the book or my story to make it the best it can be. That's the partnership. That's the agreement we have as author and editor. We're both working to make the story or book, short story, poem, whatever it might be, essay, to make it the best it can be. And if I can remember that, get back to that place where I can remember that, then the rejection is less of a sting. And then it's like, okay, I can get to work. There's
a couple things you brought up there that I liked. One is this connection between sort of what you were describing as imposter syndrome and rejection, that somehow it means we're not a real writer, or, which is funny, because I find a lot of times with earlier writers, we're so desperate to be able to call ourselves an author or a writer. And, I look at writing forums all the time, and people are like, am I a real writer? And, oh, you're a writer. And there's this sort of controversy over what defines a writer. Are you a writer if you write? Are you a writer if you're published? What's the difference? How can I achieve that? And so, I found personally in my own career, that was sort of that's what I want. I just wanted that sort of validation that I was a writer. But the problem is sometimes if you wrap your entire identity in that, sort of what we're saying there, Sandra, that then when the rejection comes and you can't separate yourself from it, then it becomes deeply personal, and it's almost like an offense to who you are. So that was also how I've dealt with rejection in my career, is to simply say writing is just something I do. It's just one of many things that I do. It doesn't define me. I am not my art. I am separate from it. And it does give that distance. But yes, I think there is almost a grieving period where you have to feel the feelings. You have to be upset. And then you can, hopefully move on, whether you choose to actually frame that rejection or incorporate it, because sometimes we have positive rejections. And I'd like to actually turn that conversation for a second. And Lauren, could you tell us about a time that you maybe received a really positive rejection that was genuinely helpful to your growth as a writer?
There've been a couple. So that first one that I sent out to be like, I just need a rejection. I need to get one under my belt. I somehow made it to like a second round where I got feedback. And there was like some feedback that was like not very good. It really hurt my feelings. And I was like, it's okay, it's my first time. But a lot of the readers like wrote, I would say a majority wrote back saying like, oh yeah, I would read something else that this author were to send in, if they were to send something else. Which then also bolstered me because I, again, was right at the beginning. I was feeling and still feel that whole identity crisis of like, am I a writer? Am I not? Am I good enough? Like, what is going on? And I thought, oh, like I can maybe do this. So it both like I was rejected and hurt, but then I also was bolstered because I was like, I can move on with this. And then also, weirdly enough, when I was querying, looking for agents, I remember in particular when they would request fulls, I'd always get my hopes up only to feel extremely crushed after. But there was one agent who I was just honored that they even read it. They were like a bigger agent. They represented, because I was writing in the YA genre, a lot of the YA authors that I personally really looked up to. And I considered like, oh, you're big, you're like a real writer. And I was just told, and there wasn't even any feedback. It was just, oh, she doesn't have time to help you launch a career. So then me in my head, I guess I did reframe it. I was like, oh, there's a possibility that I could launch a career in this. Like, this is great. Someone who just is busy representing Jason Reynolds, who I think was like the Children's Laureate of America. I'm like, yeah, you don't have time for me. You have more important clients. But it just was like a real bolster to me to be like, hey, I'll keep looking. I'll keep working through these rejections to hopefully get an acceptance.
Nisha, what about you? You talked about a time where you got this rejection for just a tiny little micro grant of $300 locally in your community, and that felt pretty devastating. And then this big multi-level one that you spent hours on, only to find out they had asked for more applicants. Is there a time where you had an experience like Lauren, where you got a positive rejection that, either boosted you or, changed the trajectory of something you were working on?
Yeah, I hate this part of the conversation, but my latest poetry collection just came out. It came out 2 months ago. Thank you. And part of that is so interesting to me because, at the point at which you get published locally, New West Press had published my first book. We had really good modest sales numbers, which was nice. And I didn't really think too much that the second publication would both reach a wider audience or be more difficult to get published. I was like, I have this local audience. I'm sure a local press will pick it up, or a small press. And I got so many of these. I feel like I was internalizing some of this rejection, but the main one came from multiple agents who had looked at it, who had looked at this manuscript, and some of them were like, oh, like it's not poetry, it's prose, or oh, this is nonfiction, right? This is essay. And part of the rejection process was like, I was like, that is not true. I was like, that is not a true thing. I don't mean to be this like difficult author being like, no, I'm right and you're wrong. But I was like, no, that is not accurate of my work. Even if they meant it with like the most clear intent. I got a final kind of agent rejection before I stopped trying to agent it, which was, like they didn't find the manuscript to be compelling enough. Those were like kind of the exact words. And this is someone I respect a lot. And it really broke me. Like I didn't touch the manuscript then for months, like multiple months. It had been 2 years of trying to get it out there. but every single iteration of it was changing into the thing it became. And I didn't even notice, right, that this rejection, that the time away from the manuscript was important. I always felt such a pressure as a younger person that I had to write what was most pressing and it had to come out right away. You know, I used to write a poem before a poetry night and perform it within 20 minutes. And you have to let go of this commitment to timeliness because timeliness is not something we can control under like a system where people have limited financial resources. And so the manuscript changed a lot. It was a really harsh rejection for me to hear that my work, which was about me, was not interesting enough. But I took it, I grieved it, I mourned that. I cried a lot and I came back to the manuscript and I was like, you know, like this is calling to me, like I still have to finish it. And I had to let go of the idea that my success was going to be defined by being published with it. And instead it just had to be completed and I had to reach a peace with it. And ironically, once I like let go of that, I produced a much better work. And later it still got rejected, but eventually it did get accepted. And it came out into the world. And that process is so long, you forget how awful it is, right? Individual word choices, individual poems, right? Like lines that I fought an editor over, you know, they seemed like battlegrounds. Every single word was a battleground when you're writing poetry.
Thank you for sharing that because that was another thing I was thinking is from genre to genre, does does one type of rejection for one genre, is it any more difficult? So when you're saying, this was personal writing and they said it wasn't compelling, that would be an instance where it would be very difficult to separate yourself from your work. So I can understand how that would feel deeply troubling. When you said you took some time away from that manuscript, did you find yourself doubling down on, no, this is who I am, this is what I write, and I'm not going to compromise my art, and it grew from that? Or did you find that part of that rejection, you were able to kind of modify the manuscript in a way that it made it more sellable? Because there's that whole other conversation about the art versus the business. And, so often that's my case as well, is no one can fit my work onto a shelf. And on the marketing and business side, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to know how it to be labeled, how we hashtag it, what shelf it belongs on, how it's marketed. So did you find you were moving towards that, or you doubled down and you just went back to that earlier version of the writer you, who could write a poem in 20 minutes and say, this is the art that I produced, and I'm not going to, try and appease.
I did my undergrad in business. I have a business degree, and that was incredibly useful for the first 2 years as a writer, where honestly, I was marketing a product that sounded way better than the skill actually was, and I used that to, I think, like really push myself to get out there and establish myself as someone who was committed to being publicly in the community, which you don't have to be, right? Like that is not a thing you have to be. And I feel like the skill actually caught up later, right? That the technical prowess or whatever you want to call it caught up later. And it was like that fake it till you make it kind of situation. I don't think I was a fake, but I do think that there were a lot of times I had to really upsell what I was doing. And later I went back and I was like, it was true, but I would market it differently now. I used to think of myself as like a very publicly self-assured person and privately very like questioning and doubtful person. I love watching films. I love, following certain celebrities. I love being like, oh, like this is a fun public thing and engaging in it and trends and watching pop culture evolve. And I had to be like, those people are not people who can tell me who to be. Right? No one is going to, in the end, like ultimately, like really tell me that, or I don't want to hear it. And having to come back and define yourself by a piece of work that other people might not like is such a commitment. Knowing it was rejected and suddenly that's like who I am. That piece is what I put myself into. But at the end of the day, like I really had to get to the point where I had to write for myself first. I had to write for a version of me that was someone's dream, someone internalized to me, right? Was I doing that person right? And I see like Catherine is in the audience, and Catherine and I have talked about it a lot, but I just had to figure out who it was that was going to exist in each piece of work and know that both of those things are who I am, but also I am separate from those things. Day to day, I watch Twilight once a week. I love Robert Pattinson. I go to movies. I can eat an entire bag of double butter popcorn. I am diabetic, but not all of those things make it into my books, right? Not all of it is captured in my work. And so it is me, but it isn't. And therefore, I don't have to always be present in my work.
I love that. I love that response. Sandra, you want to jump in there?
Yes, I do. I just love this conversation because what we haven't called out yet are gatekeepers, right? And the whole idea of rejection is who's doing the rejection, who's doing the rejecting of us as writers or poets, essayists, etc. And those are the gatekeepers. And so part of the process, I think, and maybe it is reframing after all, part of the process of, I think, handling rejection and repeat it and making it, normalizing it is realizing that the gatekeepers are subjective. There are no objective readings of anything that we write. It's all subjective because it's another human being or a group of human beings, right? For example, if so in traditional publishing, if you are submitting a book, and also, Nisha, I want to point out, I have never met anybody who enjoys the subbing process. I have yet to meet a single person who enjoys that process. At best, someone is neutral. And I think, when you sub something in traditional publishing, it's always beyond just the one editor you sub to, right? There's an entire, they have their monthly meetings to talk about possible acquisitions. So your editor that you submit to has to sell your manuscript to everybody else in that acquisitions meeting. That's the marketing team, the sales team, the maybe the editorial executive, right? So it's a whole committee. And you have no idea, we as writers have no idea who's in that room, other than that one editor we may have been communicating with. But if we have an agent, we haven't even been communicating with that editor, right? So we're so far removed from that process. And I'm pointing that out in the hopes of, reminding people that's another layer between you and your work and getting it where you think you want it to go, being published. And just remember that there's some luck involved there. No matter how much heart and soul you put into that manuscript, whatever it is, the gatekeepers are the ones who have to make that choice in traditional publishing, right? So there's so many things about publishing that are completely outside of your control. So if you don't write for yourself, if you don't write to be true to yourself, then what's the point? That's really my attitude.
Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that because with specifically the novel I have coming out, and this is something I didn't even think of until my agent actually sat me down and talked about it, is because the book is about an eating disorder and eating disorders. And she just didn't hold anything. I love her. She was just bluntly told me, she's like, you might have trouble getting this book accepted because of the topic. She said because most of the publishers she wanted to send it to, the editors were all female. She's like, this is a disease. She's like, it's very diverse. It's not just women, but majority female identifying individuals who develop it. So she said they might not want to engage with this subject because they would have experienced it and they don't want to be triggered, or they know someone else who's experienced it, just because it's a disease that affects everyone. So it was just like another layer that I as the writer, because this was what I wanted to write about. This was the topic that I just didn't even think of or know about. And I needed that outside perspective to tell me like, oh yeah, this could be difficult. So it's, you never know as a writer if it's just like someone just can't engage with the topic. Like if you're trying to say you wrote a book about the pandemic and you're sending it out, like so many people don't want to even think about the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdowns. That was really traumatizing for them. So there's really things you can't control. So that's, I don't know, how I deal with it is I'm just like, this is what I want to write about. This is what's important to me. And people can either choose to engage with it or not.
Yeah. And sometimes people are just having a bad day. Like an
Yeah.
editor's reading your stuff and it's like they're having a bad
I
day
had,
and they can't concentrate and they can't engage. Like you have no control over that.
yeah, I had an editor come back to me because it takes place, my book takes place over an inpatient treatment. And she told me that she didn't think the length of it was realistic enough for the results in the book. And I was like, do you understand how the medical system works? Like, you don't get to stay there indefinitely. They kick you out. They have to move on to other, once you're like stable and they think you can maybe deal with things, you get moved on regardless of what your condition is. Like, yeah, it was one of those things where I'm like, oh, I don't agree with this. So like, thank you for not accepting my manuscript.
It's so much, our writing, whether it's a finished book and it's trying to find a reader, or whether it's an unpublished piece trying to find a home, it really is about connecting with that gatekeeper. And sometimes I think that's another way we can manage rejection. I send my work out. It's, there's a lot of Gen X related themes. It's about people whose lives have not turned out the way they expected. Likely someone who is young and has the whole world ahead of them. They don't want to read about sad people in their 40s. So that's another way that I manage to deal with my own rejection sometimes, is to say, okay, this was not the right fit for this particular editor, and I can totally see why this would either feel like a cautionary tale or would be depressing, whereas someone, an older reader might be able to identify with that subject matter. And again, that comes with luck, because sometimes we know who we're submitting to. If you have the privilege of an agent, they can make strategic submissions. But if not, if we're just blindly submitting to a journal, even if we sometimes see who the fiction editor is, we don't always know if there's other readers or a team or other people within acquisitions that are not going to relate to that. And so, sure, maybe they will just pick a good story, but we know writing is ultimately about connection. So whether it's a published work or an unpublished, it's so much about finding the right people. I knew an agent once who had a manuscript about, the sort of always being a bridesmaid tale. And the manuscript was like finished around Christmas, around the holiday sort of season, winter. He's like, nope, sending this out next year to all the young editors who I know are going to be out doing weddings in June, July. And it got picked up right away. So timing, luck, strategy, all of that stuff plays a role. And the more you learn about publishing too, especially on the inside or the other side, because it's very easy to feel like they don't want me. They're, agents sometimes get 200 emails per day, 200 submissions sometimes in a single day. Judging contests, I just was a reader for the CBC Short Story Prize. Hundreds of submissions you have to read. And so being on the other side of that, or getting a glimpse into agent world, editor world, reader world, you start to see. And then again, it's a way to make it less personal, because you realize when you have hundreds and hundreds of people, they're not thinking about the person that spent 10 years writing this particular manuscript. They have to make sometimes really quick decisions. Sandra, like you said, sometimes they could just have a really bad day, and that's the difference between getting an acceptance or a rejection. So we've seen some positive ways that we've been able to take rejection. Sandra, even in that editorial letter, you said it was 11 pages long and there was only one line that was positive, but you realized, you were able to reframe and say, they want me to write this the best book possible, which makes sense. That's absolutely what an editor wants to do. When was a time where rejection derailed you? Nisha, you've already sort of spoke about that. You put the book away for a while. It really crushed you. Any other experiences where, and maybe it was the nature of the rejection. Maybe it was feedback that you didn't agree with. Maybe you found it, extra harsh or too generic. Sometimes the really generic ones, when you've put your heart and soul into something, you've spent hours on an application, sometimes those are harder to take. Do you have an example, any of you, of a time that a rejection really derailed you and it took a while to bounce back from?
Yeah, I can maybe go first for that.
Sure.
Like in the very short form of it, because I competed so much in spoken word, right before the pandemic, I had qualified to go to the Poetry World Championship. And then the pandemic led to kind of a travel lockdown. and I didn't get to go that year. It was 2020, and that was like a multi-stage process to have qualified. Through a series of circumstances in which in the following years, some other folks kind of changed their mind, it trickled down that I had the opportunity to go again. And I had to re-qualify. And I re-qualified in Brazil. Like I was flown out to Rio. And I did this thing and I placed high enough to go. And then I got to the World Cup, which was in Belgium. Again, it was like some of the cost was covered. And I came second last in the World Championship. Like I was almost last. And I was so mad about it, because I was like, all of this time, this has been like a multi-year process only to face this like big public defeat, Like I was
And
like,
yet you're at the World Championships, which
right,
is
but
such a
I'm like,
Yeah.
which
huge
is
achievement.
exciting. And this is
Yeah.
actually one of my favorite stories to tell now because, I came out of it and I was like, I don't know if I would have changed the poem I chose. I think I would have maybe changed some of the delivery. I wouldn't have changed shifting my schedule and stuff like that. I wouldn't have changed any of that. But I felt humiliated. I felt deeply angry about it. Things did not go my way. I actually got into a car accident while I was in Belgium, very minor. And a friend later was like, I was going to the finals. They were like, that was the universe telling you not to go. Like, listen. And I came home. And you know what? Unless I bring it up, no one cares. No one cares, right? It's fine. No one asks about it. They don't go, oh, remember that time? Like, it doesn't matter. And the thing is, they don't always remember your successes either. We have too much information that is being thrown at us, right? We already have to account for like hundreds of people in our social networks, or even just our huge families. In my case, like no one has time for it. It's fine. It's okay. It will come and go. I am personally internally still humiliated by it, but it's not going to come up unless I bring it up.
Okay, I want to touch on something you said there about no one cares, and they don't really care about your successes either. And I want to talk about the influence of social media on how we perceive success and failure, because perception is reality oftentimes. So I know that there's, when we see other people being successful, they received a grant, they got an agent, they have a 2-book deal. It can also be really crushing, but we don't often see, as Sandra said, the hard work and the grit that went into that, the 10,000 rejections that led up until that moment of acceptance. So how would you define the impact of social media and our perception of what it means to be a successful author, in light of what we know is that rejection is really a part of the job, it's part of the career, but that sometimes that perception is skewed by what we see on social media. Anyone can jump in there.
I mean, I would say the number one thing about being an author on social media is recognizing that everyone's putting their best foot forward. Everyone's got their game face on. Like there's a sprinkling of posts where someone is, and I think it might be generational too, but someone is saying, this crappy stuff is happening to me right now. But the huge majority of posts are about, look at this fantastic thing. And also look at my fantastic life. And oh, wow, look at my plants. Aren't they lovely? And everything is so contrived in a way, right? But we all know it. That's the thing. You need to recognize that we are all posting these really positive things with these beautiful filters on Instagram, for example. We're not always going to be like saying, oh, my book's not selling great. My book's not selling great. It's been 6 months or 2 years or whatever. And I just wish, because nobody feels like anyone wants to hear that. And that's, like this unspoken rule. There are so many unspoken rules too in publishing that you just find out on your own. You ask friends, but they're not written down anywhere. And one of the unspoken rules is be positive when you're on social media, especially about your career, about your books. You're not going to, I don't know, the conventional wisdom is you're not going to sell a lot of books by saying, I'm not selling a lot of books. And
like not just that if perception really is reality, if you look successful, that might lead like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right, where you get invited to present a gig somewhere, or you get
Right.
invited to submit, or all of a sudden an agent becomes interested in your work. So there is,
Yeah.
a actual tangible advantage sometimes
Right.
to, obviously showing all the success that you're having.
Yeah. And
But
there's also
yeah.
a small percentage. There's also the
Mhm.
small percentage of authors who get deals because they said something or did something on social media. And that's a
Yeah.
very small percentage. It's the exception that proves the rule, but because those exceptions exist,
Mhm.
we all glom onto them like, oh, it's
Mhm.
possible. I
Yeah.
mean, and it is possible. That's not a bad thing. I
Yeah.
think what we're trying to pinpoint is being able to separate the possibility and having your dreams from sometimes the reality of rejection, which is that's not happening on the timeline that I want. It's not
Mhm.
happening at the scale that I want. Like Nisha put in a great comment in the chat, like if someone was paying her 7 figures, she would tailor whatever she was writing to whatever they want. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's real, right? We're not, how many of us are getting 7-figure deals? It's a very small percentage, but we all are so excited about that possibility. And sometimes that can be useful fuel, and sometimes it just makes us feel bad. So having social media breaks is really important, I think, as to keep your career going, keep your creative juices flowing, and your creative life healthy is really important to take some social media breaks. Even when intellectually, that everyone's putting their game face on, but sometimes in your heart, you're like, I'm failing because I'm not doing that. I don't
Mhm.
have that. I don't have an announcement every week, like that kind of a thing. So, yeah,
Lauren,
yeah.
what about you? How do you manage sort of expectations versus reality regarding things like rejection and perceived success on social media?
I know. So my publisher that I am with, they like gave a webinar series to us about how to use different social media things. So like, and I'm a debut author, so there's debut authors and established authors. Like we're being trained how to use social media and being told like, hey, here's like a things you should highlight. Like when you get your cover, make sure you say that. Make sure you talk about sales. So we're also being primed, like Sandra said, it was all positive. Like I'm being told put up all of these positive things, but I also like hate social media and love it. I call myself a lurker because I realized I'm a much more private person. So I just, and I hate photos of myself. So I don't like know what to post on social media. I skipped all the talks about TikTok because I am like, nobody wants to see me like doing voiceovers and dancing. Like I'm embarrassed thinking about it. And I just think it can be quite toxic and whatnot. But I have had many moments where I'm looking at social media and it's people that I'm like excited that they got success, but then also feeling like intense jealousy. It makes me feel like I'm like, oh, I'm a terrible person because I'm so jealous because this person got 2 books, but I only got 1 book. And it's like you're getting rejections over and over, but it's just yourself telling you you're not good enough and rejecting yourself. So I'm very much with those, I try to think like, hey, there's room for everyone. This person's success, you can celebrate it, and it's not going to take away from your own. Like I'm still doing what I'm doing. So I try to take breaks from social media just because it's so hard. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything good with I can say, but it's all very much a mixed bag because it is necessary to promote your book and continue to get some success. But then if you're not getting the success that you think you should have, that you see other people having, it gets very difficult. And then I also have the experience where my book just arcs have gone out and it's gone up on Goodreads, and I'm now like telling myself, don't even go to Goodreads, don't read reviews, like reader rejection is a whole other level, and it all is dependent on how the reader was feeling at that moment. If they wanted to engage with your book, it's all even more subjective than agents being like, oh, I didn't like this thing, I didn't like this thing. So it's just a balancing and taking moments to safeguard yourself as well, to be like, this is where I'm at, this is how I'm feeling. I'll just put the social media aside, or I'll put the manuscript aside for a bit, or I'll go work on something else.
And isn't that social media, when we see those successes, you mentioned sort of being jealous or thinking, well, what's wrong with me, or why can I not have that success? That's part of the problem, again, of social media, when we only put out the positive, which we need to put out the positive because we are selling a product. The writing, the art is the writing, but the selling of the book is the business side of it. So of course we want to, be able to promote our work in a positive way, but that does just add to that sort of delusion that there's something wrong with you, or that there's something that you're not doing correct, which is just not the case. And, the interesting thing you said there is that, there's room for everyone. And I always say, but there's not. There really is not room for everyone. Everyone can write, but there's not room for everyone in publishing. And that's one of the hard realities, because at the end of the day, you're competing for publishing space, you're competing for review space, you're competing for grants. Those are legitimate competitions where there literally is not room for everyone, which is another thing that makes it difficult, is that at the end of the day, it, like getting on a basketball team or getting into med school, like there are often only a certain number of positions. Now, it doesn't mean you stop playing basketball, but there's something about writers where we take it as a deep tragedy where you cannot go on. So, I always default back to, if you're really not writing for yourself or for the joy of writing, because there can be so much agony and anguish on the other side by trying to get published, then it's probably not the best thing to be involved with. Yeah, and now I got lots of comments flying. I'm going to take your last comments, and then I want to open it up to some questions, because we do have a question in the chat, but feedback on that. Nisha and Lauren, you both put your hands up.
I'll be so quick.
Okay.
I would just say, like, in terms of financial picture, for folks who don't always know, the Edmonton Arts Council just did a round of grant applications. In the time period from when I first applied to those grants, they would get, let's say in one period, about 80 applications. This year, they had over 400 applications. However, the city has not increased the amount of money that the Art Council has received to disperse to artists. The same is true of the national level, that until maybe like this last year, the amount of funds going out to the same pool has not increased. And actually, the Alberta Foundation increased it for the first time under the UCP, not even under other governments. And so you might think of it as like all of these rejections keep coming towards you, but you are not someone else's financial bottom line. You are not someone else's financial incapacity, right, to help you. And I think we got to figure out a better way to survive in our art and to love our art that is outside of these financial bottom lines, because for me, like, I do feel rejected by it, right? I feel like, oh, like, how come I put years and years into this thing and it gets harder and harder? But it is getting harder and harder.
It's getting harder.
Yeah. Like, just monetarily, it is getting harder and harder. And Lauren talked about, like, being social media trained. I talked to an agent at Cook about this, and I don't have an agent, but I talked to this agent. The amount of marketing space for books is the same as it was. And so now more and more writers, especially marginalized writers, are getting published, but we are sharing the same space. So we are competing with each other. It is getting harder, right? And so, like, if you are getting more rejections than before, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And it's only the people who are able to, like, really get sometimes lucky to get their foot in the door that will continue to get opportunities, because the privilege compounds. And some of us don't have it, or some of us have it in some places and not in others.
Lauren, jump in.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, like, it's rough. It's rough trying to get into traditional publishing. And I worked hard at it, but I think a lot of my luck was actually just luck and had to do with timing, because I found my agent. She had founded recently this like publishing group called Disability in Publishing, where it's a bunch of agents looking for stuff about health, about disability. So when she saw my manuscript about mental health, eating disorders, she was like, yes, this is great. And then it just happened, like, earlier that year, a new imprint was made that was focusing on books for young adults, teens, children, all about social emotional health, mental health. And at just that moment, the publisher who ended up picking up the editor who ended up getting my manuscript was looking specifically for things in a clinical setting. So like, it was just like the perfect storm where it was like, yeah, that's why it happened. But it's so hard being like, I just need to get lucky.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard just waiting for that or hoping it'll happen and having it not happen. And then especially if you are in a marginalized group, there are all of these other barriers within publishing, because publishing can be very traditional, very, very problematic. And it just is like, it's barrier after barrier after barrier sometimes.
Yep. There's a great question in the chat here, which I think leads us to my final point, is sort of what would be your one tip. But this specific question from Ash, I have a question about rejections. When you get your hopes up, how do you manage those sort of expectations, especially when you see, that maybe something has sort of moved up, or that the possibility, or it looks like there is there's hope there. How do you manage those expectations?
Can I answer that one?
Yeah, for sure.
So I talk about this a lot, actually, which is like, how you have to separate yourself from your work. So you can separate yourself from your dreams and your hopes. Like, the outcome is not related to how big you dream, right? You just dream big. You just hope big, you dream big, and you just believe in yourself and your work. That is completely separate from whatever the outcome might be of submitting. That's how I approach it. So I am still dreaming of that 7-figure deal, multi-book. Why not? Why not dream? That brings me joy and it energizes me. Is it likely I'm going to get it? I have no idea. No idea, but it's important to me to like keep dreaming and keep hoping. And so what if it comes back and you don't get the thing that you really, really wanted? Again, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That's how I take it. There's nothing wrong with you, right? So that's like sort of the philosophical, metaphysical way to deal with it. I think the practical way to deal with it is like, keep busy, keep writing that next thing, keep, being creative in whatever way works for you. And then that helps manage that kind of the crests and the troughs of this industry, and hoping and getting rejected and hoping and getting rejected. That's just how it goes, right? It's a bit of a roller coaster. It's the wave, whatever it might be. Like, practically speaking, keep busy, keep writing, keep creative, and then look for the next thing that you could submit to, the next place. And then keep your hopes up that way. I mean, I think that works for a lot of people. If it doesn't work for you, then that's when you go to your friends, your writing group, right? You find other people so you can say, like, I need to share about how I'm feeling. And it sounds so silly, but that makes a huge difference. You find your community who understands. So we all have our family members who are like 1,000% supportive of us, friends and family, but they have no idea what this is like.
Yeah.
They really don't get it. Like, they just love us, they support us, but they really don't get the ins and outs. So I would say find the community of writers who really understand what it's like. Because commiserating it's really important to have that outlet. Yeah.
Yeah, I love, Sandra, how you offered both a sort of a philosophical approach, but also like a practical, more tactical approach. I'm going to give you a counterpoint to that. I'm kind of the opposite. I don't have any big dreams. I have zero expectations. Maybe that's because I've been at it for a while, but I kind of choose a negative path to happiness, sort of like, what's the worst case scenario? Well, it's probably going to happen. So that, is sort of in opposition to what Sandra's saying, but it is a different way of thinking, but it works for me. So there's that option too. It's okay to have zero expectations. It's okay to assume, and it's not that I don't believe in the power of positive thinking, but I don't really believe in the power of positive thinking. All I could do is put, tactically, I can work hard to improve my craft, so that's how I usually sort of manage it, is just low expectations, but how can I improve? How can I get better? And that's, I'll put that towards my my craft. I used to say I rage wrote, so I get that rejection. Well, I'll tell you, you're going to reject me. I'm going to write 6 more things and get those published. So yeah, I think we all have different ways, but
Yeah.
a couple things you mentioned, keeping busy is really good. So
Yeah.
switch to another project. And again, community is so important. Even having this conversation now that's, honest and people really talking about the feelings around this, because sometimes we talked about this privately before, about sometimes there's like this toxic positivity that comes with rejection, and it's often posted on social media, where someone's like, I got a rejection and it's great because it just means I'm closer to getting that publishing deal. And then you're like, because that's can be hard too, because we have a right to feel and react that, in that immediate aftermath of rejection. It's how we deal with it when we've had some distance that really can make a difference between whether you stay in this very difficult industry that is changing constantly and is so hard to predict, or whether you sort of walk away, and which is devastating because, if you're writing, it's hopefully the love of creation that brought you to the craft in the first place, not the 6-figure book deal that we all sort of imagine. So great advice. So finishing up, I'd love to hear your favorite tip or your absolute best advice you can share about managing rejection, Lauren.
Oh, I don't know if I have a good tip. I just have how I do it. So if you, like me, have a partner who occasionally when you're sad is like, oh, I'll buy you something and you'll feel better. Only get them to buy you consumables, because otherwise you'll have I got a book as a gift and I now have this book. I'm like, that's a rejection book. I got this book because I was rejected. And now every time I consider giving it to a little free library, but I think he wrote something in it. So I'm like, I can't get rid of it. So if someone's going to gift you something, ask for your comfort food. If you have them, I have a day job. It gives me benefits. So I have therapy. I talk to my therapist. I've developed coping skills. And just have, again, like Sandra was saying, you need those people to commiserate with. You need people who, when you tell them I got rejected from this publication, I was really excited for that. You want people who will understand and be able to feel it with you, so you're not alone, but then hopefully spur you on to write your next thing.
Great. Nisha, parting advice, some wisdom on how to manage.
Yeah, I think my ability to handle rejection it fluctuates with how stable I feel my life is, either with my health or with my finances, which are very closely linked. And I would say if you can't, and most of us can't, make writing your full-time job, and the pressure of which can change your writing in bad ways too, don't do it, right? It's a lot easier to handle rejection when it's not your life and death situation. And that's okay, because if you write from a place of safety, you receive rejection from a place of safety too. And either that safety comes from having someone who supports you, supporting yourself, or, having a friends group, or, a peer group that can help. One of the comments mentioned that as well, right? It's not okay how we are treated as writers. It's not okay getting a form rejection. It's not okay being told no with no comments. We are supposed to talk to each other. We're supposed to rely on publishing individuals to care about us. And being told that we are not cared for is a hard thing. You should feel sad about it, but it's not a reflection of your worth. And if I can walk away from a rejection without, the next 6 months or 12 months of my life being on hold from a grant or whatever, then I would recommend doing that. Build a life where your writing doesn't define whether you're alive or not, or your worth, your worthiness. And you can do that by just having friends who will read your work, or finding a group where you can share it. A good offense is a great defense, I guess.
I love that. And I think the biggest thing to remember is that everyone's writing path, everyone's career is completely different. I don't know 2 authors that share the same path to publication, or, no 2 careers look the same. So, often when we see someone else successful, it's so hard to even follow that because there was a million layers to get to that particular point. I want to thank my fantastic panelists today. Lovely, diverse, honest, vulnerable, funny opinions, perspectives on this. It actually almost, not that it was controversial, but we see that such a wide spectrum and a wide scope of responses. And I think normalizing all of those responses, so the jealousy, the rage, the sadness, the deep existential pain and dread, the not being seen, all of that is important. I wish it was not part of the process, but I think when we create art versus, I don't know, I was going to say making a sandwich, but some people would say making a sandwich could be art too. They call Subway people sandwich artists, so that's not the best example. But we do tend to put part of ourselves in our art, and that is ultimately why, rejection stings. It's okay that it stings. It's, kind of how we manage. And thank you so much, Sandra Wong, Lauren Seal, and Nisha Patel for such a fantastic, engaging conversation, and for the comments in the chat. We've been scanning them. I know my co-hosts here have been answering them. So thank you so much for tuning in, and keep on writing.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.